Rain, an October downpour, unleashed itself upon New York City as though determined to scour away every dark corner of its being. Atop the bell tower of St. Patrick's Cathedral, a crimson silhouette pitched forward, slicing through the damp night air. Peter Parker gripped the webline tighter, feeling each cold drop seep through his spandex suit. Tonight was unusually quiet. No robberies, no blaring alarms, yet that silence brought him no peace. On the contrary, it squeezed at his chest like a premonition of death. His spider sense, that sixth sense which had saved his life countless times, was humming a chaotic melody inside his skull. It was not the sharp, directional warning ping he knew so well, but a steady, omnipresent drone, as though the entire city had suddenly become a threat. What he did not know was that, from an abandoned building at a safe distance, a pair of hate-filled eyes was watching him through hundreds of lenses. Quentin Beck, the man who still called himself Mysterio, smiled a venomous smile behind his spherical helmet. Before him sat a machine glittering with cold violet light, radiating a strange and unsettling energy. It was the neural resonance device, a lethal prototype he had stolen from a secret Oscorp laboratory. "You are used to being the joke, aren't you, Spider-Man?" Beck murmured, his voice echoing inside his own mind. "But tonight there is no smoke, no mirrors. Tonight I will show you something real, your real fear." The machine shuddered violently and released an invisible pulse that swept across half of Manhattan. Peter Parker, swinging across Fifth Avenue, froze in midair. The droning in his head erupted into a searing pain, a soundless scream that pierced him to the bone. He staggered onto a rain-soaked rooftop, gasping. Something had changed. The air around him seemed to thicken, heavy with a menace he could not see. Driven by a gnawing unease, Peter bolted back to his small apartment in Queens. The rain had stopped, but the night sky remained starless. As he slipped through the window, a strange scent drifted through the darkness. Ozone, and something sweetly acrid, like scorched waffle cookies, the kind Aunt May used to make every Sunday morning. On his desk, which was normally cluttered with camera parts and stale cracker boxes, sat a sleek black case. It had not been there when he left. Peter's heartbeat slowed, each beat heavy and deliberate. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to destroy it immediately, but the curious hands of a scientist betrayed him. He stepped forward and leaned down to examine it. The case had no seams, no lock. It simply opened. A blinding violet light flooded the room, and Peter Parker's world shattered. The ticking of the wall clock grew sluggish, then warped like a scratched record. He heard a faint, ragged exhale. He turned. In the worn armchair where Aunt May used to sit and knit, there she was now, pale and hollow-cheeked. A dark red stain spread across the sweater she wore, dripping drop by drop onto the wooden floor. "You promised." Aunt May's voice was hoarse and broken, her vacant eyes staring straight at him. "You promised you would always be here, but where were you, Peter?" "No, this isn't real." Peter staggered backward, his voice trembling. He knew. The rational part of his mind knew this was nothing but an illusion, a vile psychological trick. But his heart did not. The image before him, the thick iron smell of blood, the warmth being drained from the room, all of it felt real. The guilt he had buried for so long, the grief of losing the woman who had been a second mother to him, had been excavated and reconstructed by that machine in the most merciless way imaginable. Coward, the corpse of Aunt May suddenly rose, cold fingers pointing straight at his face. "You only bring death to those you love," Peter cried out, a scream of anguish and fury. He spun and ran, throwing himself into the bathroom and slamming the door behind him. He wrenched on the faucet and splashed freezing water across his face, trying to drown out the nightmare. Then he looked up into the mirror. The face staring back was not that of a young man in his mid-20s with red-rimmed eyes. It was a monster. The red and blue Spider-Man suit seemed to be melting, merging into his skin in veins of pure black. The eyes of the mask grew larger, distorted, filled with a primal and ravenous hunger. The flesh beneath the fabric cracked open, and from those cracks, hundreds of tiny red spiders were crawling out, swarming across his face. "You are the monster, Parker," the creature in the mirror said in the voice of venom, in the voice of the darkest part of his own soul. Beneath the mask, you are nothing but a venomous spider. "Shut up." Peter roared and drove his fist with every ounce of his superhuman strength into the mirror. Glass exploded into thousands of shards, biting into his hand, blood mingling with water and glittering fragments. The sudden physical pain yanked him back to reality with brutal force. The bathroom returned to normal, but the terror remained intact. A familiar, nauseating laugh rang out from every corner. The screen of Peter's phone lit up on its own. displaying the face of Mysterio beneath his milky white glass dome. "Hello, little spider," Beck sneered. "How did you enjoy the film I just screened for you? This is no cheap stage magic. This machine interfaces directly with your prefrontal cortex. What you saw, it was real. Your fear, your guilt, they are as real as the breath in your lungs. I will not kill you. That would be far too easy. I will let this entire city see the true face of Spider-Man, a panicking kid, a grotesque monster, a danger to the very people he swore to protect." The screen went dark, leaving Peter Parker alone in his wrecked apartment, fingers bleeding, mind teetering on the edge of collapse. The real assault came the following day, under a glaring sun. Peter, exhausted and sleepless, clung to the hope that daylight would chase the nightmares away. But the neural resonance device had rewritten the rules. In the middle of Union Square, an armored vehicle exploded. The screaming of the crowd tore through the air. Peter, who dropped in from above without a moment's hesitation, saw a group of heavily armored robots hauling bags of cash, while their weapons fired beams of destructive laser fire. Without hesitation, he plunged in like a bullet. "Stop right there. You are hurting innocent people," he snarled, launching a spinning kick at the one leading the group. His foot passed clean through the illusion of the gunman and slammed into a traffic signal pole with tremendous force, snapping it in two. But in his manipulated mind, that kick had brought down an enemy of steel. He turned and fired a web at another illusion, pressing a gun to a woman's head. The line wrapped tight around a metal trash can, and with a sharp pull, he sent it flying, straight through the glass front of a crowded coffee shop. The people on the street stared at Spider-Man in horror. They did not see any robots. They did not see any laser fire. They only saw Spider-Man tearing through the street in a frenzy, striking at empty air, hurling objects at passers-by. A police officer drew his weapon and shouted, "Freeze, hands down." But Peter heard only the screaming of victims and the gunfire of enemies. He dodged a laser blast, and in reality, he had just evaded a real bullet fired by the officer. To him, that move was self-defense. To everyone watching, it was an act of resistance and assault against law enforcement. Phone cameras everywhere captured every second of it. Mysterio, from his control room, let out a savage laugh. He broadcast the footage live across every news channel, paired with a special filter that showed what Peter was seeing, a heroic battle against villains. The horrifying contrast between Peter's action sequence and the actual security footage triggered a media earthquake. "Yeah, Jonah Jameson nearly leapt off his seat during his broadcast. I told you so. He is a dangerous lunatic, a threat that must be put down." When the illusion finally dissolved, Peter stood in the middle of wreckage and chaos. Police sirens wailed from every direction. He looked down at his bloodied hands, then at the terrified and hateful faces all turned toward him. A cold despair took hold of him. He could no longer tell what was real. His spider sense was screaming constantly, warning him about everything and nothing at once. An innocent pedestrian, a swaying branch, a police officer taking aim, all of them triggered the same level of alarm. His ultimate defense mechanism had become an instrument of torture, trapping him in a world where everything was a threat. He ran, not out of cowardice, but because he knew that if he stayed, he would genuinely hurt someone. He fled into the dark and damp underground tunnel system beneath the city, a place that had once been home to him during his darkest days. Down here, in absolute darkness, his spider sense finally went quiet. But that silence was even more terrifying. It laid bare the truth. He was alone, hunted, and slowly losing his mind. At some point, Peter made his way back to the old house in Forest Hills, Queens. Someone else lived there now, but he slipped into the attic room where Uncle Ben used to store things. The smell of old wood and the dust of the past wrapped around him. He sank to the floor, held his head in his hands, and felt as small and as helpless as the boy he once was when he first lost the uncle he loved. "I cannot do this anymore, Uncle Ben," he whispered. "I cannot tell what is real. I am a danger to everyone." In his memory, he saw that fateful evening again, and the words that had shaped his entire life. But then, another memory surfaced, softer and gentler, a memory of Aunt May after she learned the truth that he was Spider-Man. She had not scolded him. She had not been afraid. She simply took his calloused hands in hers and said, "Peter, I know you are scared, but courage is not the absence of fear. It is facing fear and choosing to move forward anyway. And I know you. You are the bravest person I have ever met." Those words were a small beam of light cutting through the darkness inside his mind. Courage. face the fear. Peter drew a long, slow breath. He forced his chaotic mind to think. Mysterio, his enemy. What made him powerful? Illusions. What made him weak? The truth. He was a con artist, a clown starving for recognition. He would not end this game in some nameless alley. He needed a stage, the grandest stage of all. Times Square, Peter murmured, his eyes lighting up with a cold and quiet resolve. He will want the whole world to watch Spider-Man fall. Night came. The massive advertising screens of Times Square suddenly flickered in unison and shifted to a deadly shade of violet. The image of Mysterio's helmet appeared, enormous, filling every corner of the square. Thousands of residents and tourists standing there froze, not yet understanding what was happening. Citizens of New York, Mysterio's voice thundered like a storm. You are in danger. A monster is hiding among us, wearing the mask of a hero. I, Mysterio, will be your savior. Watch. He flipped the switch. The neural resonance device, positioned atop an advertising tower, unleashed a massive shockwave pulse. But instead of targeting a single person, this time it blanketed the entire square. A collective nightmare began. People started screaming, seeing alien creatures, walls of fire, or the most intimate fears buried within themselves. Chaos swallowed everything. And at that exact moment, Peter Parker dropped down, but he was not wearing his mask. He had torn it off himself in a previous moment of desperation. He stood there, a lean young man with disheveled brown hair, his face pale and bruised, his eyes deep set but blazing with a fire that could not be extinguished. He wore nothing but a torn sweater and a pair of jeans. "Stop it, Beck," Peter shouted, and his voice no longer trembled. Mysterio turned and laughed. "Look at this, the maskless clown. Without that flashy suit of yours, you are nothing, Parker. Just a pitiful little insect. And you dare come here. This place will be your grave. Come and taste what real fear feels like." The machine roared and focused its full power on Peter, and hell descended. Aunt May, bearing her fatal wound, dragged herself toward him, arms outstretched as though to strangle him. Uncle Ben, with a bullet hole in his chest, stood there shaking his head in quiet disappointment. Gwen Stacy, her neck snapped at a horrifying angle, fell from above and whispered, "I trusted you." And finally, Peter Parker himself appeared in the form of Venom, snarling, "All of this is your fault." They all came at him at once. Punches, clawing, tearing, and each one produced real pain. Peter's ribs felt as though they were splintering. Blood poured from his mouth. He collapsed to the ground, tormented by the ghosts of his own past. But in the depths of that agony, a thought blazed through his mind. Mysterio had said, "Come and taste what real fear feels like." All of this, every last bit of it, was nothing but fear. It was the past. It was guilt. It was things that could never be changed. It was not the present. And it was the product of sight, of a mind being deceived. "You are nothing but a fraud," Peter snarled, pressing his hands against the ground and forcing himself upright. His trembling hands reached up and tore a long strip of fabric from his sweater. Without a moment of hesitation, he pressed it tightly over his eyes. Absolute darkness swallowed his world. The screaming, the horrifying images, all of it vanished. Only stillness remained. And then, within that boundless silence, his spider sense awakened. No longer polluted by sight, it sharpened and purified itself into its truest form. It no longer droned with chaos. It was a web of vibrations, a three-dimensional map of reality. Every genuine threat stood out as clearly as stars against a dark sky. Mysterio screamed orders, sending the illusions surging at him. They came from every direction. But this time, Peter did not dodge them. He passed through them because they produced no vibration whatsoever. They were nothing. His body reacted on its own, slipping away from a real shard of glass falling from above, then stepping lightly over a crack splitting open in the ground beneath him. He moved like a ballet dancer inside a storm, seeing everything without needing to look. He felt it, the energy source of the neural resonance device. It emitted a piercing vibration, an electronic shriek. It was above him, to the right, roughly 50 meters away. It was the only real threat. Peter coiled his body, every ounce of strength flowing into his legs. "It is over, Beck," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Kill him." Mysterio commanded his army of illusory monsters. But Peter had already launched himself. A leap of absolute faith. He shot upward through the air, body spinning, cutting through every illusion, through every fear, through the limits of himself. His fist, clenched with all the strength and will of Spider-Man, drove straight into the source of that deadly vibration. A deafening explosion tore through everything else. The neural resonance device shattered into millions of shards of glass and metal. The violet light died. Every illusion across the square vanished simultaneously like soap bubbles, leaving behind a crowd of shaken but unharmed people. Mysterio stumbled backward with a scream of terror and fury. He saw Peter Parker, eyes still blindfolded, standing tall atop the wreckage of the machine, fingers dripping with blood. For the first time in his life, Quentin Beck felt genuine fear. "Impossible," he stammered. "You cannot have won. I am the master of illusions. I showed you the truth." "The truth," Peter said, pulling the blindfold away and meeting his gaze with clear and steady eyes, "is that you have always been nothing but a clown." The police flooded in and took Quentin Beck into custody, utterly broken. Peter stood there, in the middle of Times Square. The advertising screens had come back to life, their light falling across his torn and battered frame. The crowd was silent, watching him. No one cheered, but no one jeered either. They simply looked, with a quiet and reverent awe. A boy, about 7 or 8 years old, wearing a Spider-Man printed t-shirt, suddenly broke free from the crowd. In his hand was a cheap, spare Spider-Man mask, the kind Peter often gave to children. "Mr. Spider-Man," the boy said, his voice trembling but full of admiration, "you dropped this." Peter looked down at the boy, then at the simple cloth mask. He knelt and took it. A tired but genuine smile crossed his bloodied and bruised face. He put the mask on. It did not fit well. It was very cheap, but it was a symbol of hope. He fired a web line toward the tallest building and launched himself into the night. He knew that tomorrow the Daily Bugle would run its screaming headlines. He knew there would still be people who doubted him, who feared him. The scars inside him, the memories of this night, would never fully heal. But he was Spider-Man. As long as there was one person who needed protecting, as long as there was one thread of hope, he would be there. A few days later, on the brick wall of the alley where Uncle Ben had fallen, a new piece of graffiti appeared. It was not an image of Spider-Man defeating a villain. It was a portrait of him, eyes bound by a strip of black cloth, and beneath it, words scrawled rough but full of power, "The hero in the dark." Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so very much.